Hello, everybody. So as was established, my name is Juulia Suvilehto, and I'm going to be talking to you about our online study that we've been running in a primarily Nordic population. And we haven't gotten super deep into the data yet. So today I'm going to restrict my talk to being just about how has cohabiting versus living alone impacted social touch during the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's see, slide change, successful. As Rochelle started today with, our social lives have changed dramatically. I don't need to necessarily tell you this, you probably all lived through it, especially in terms of whether it's recommended or even restricted to meet in person, what kinds of social interactions feel safe and okay. And our hypothesis is that this may have had, or this likely has had, a differential impact depending on whether you are cohabiting with others or whether you're living alone. Because if you're living with others, you still may have at least one source of social interaction and social touch that is a-okay according to most rules and regulations. Whereas if you live alone, depending on where you live, you may have not been able to meet up with someone in person for the better part of last year. So this, and if you think about it for yourself, this can indeed kind of start shifting our attitudes and thoughts about social touching. So we ran an online study with mainly Nordic participants using the platform Qualtrics, and we boosted the study on Facebook. And unlike the other studies that I think are going to happen today, we did not try to get a specific slice in time, but we were trying to get a slow and steady stream of data. Our participants are mainly from Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. And completely coincidentally, the study is also available in Danish, Finnish, Norwegian, and Swedish, and English. And the boosting that we run on Facebook to get these participants, I think the N is 370 at this point, was done in these Nordic languages to people living in these Nordic countries. And as I said, we tried to get the data to come in little by little rather than a big chunk all at once. So we started the data collection in October of last year, and the data collection is technically still ongoing. The data I'm showing you here were collected prior to the 8th of June, and which was coincidentally also when we started first looking at these data. So this is a very superficial look at some of the variables we have in the study. And I should say that the reason why we wanted to be a little bit geographically restricted and also get a sample over a longer period of time is that we thought that this may allow us then later to look a little bit at how these social judgments may be or may not be impacted by things like the epidemic situation in the country a person is living in, and also whether there are like restrictions in place at that point in time versus at a different point in time where there may be different restrictions in place. And as is very common for online studies like these, our participants were very female heavy. The average age was 41 years old, and the spread was a little older than maybe you would normally see in studies like this, but I suspect this has to do with the fact that, as I've been told, Facebook is the social media for old people these days. And because the data that I'm showing today and the analysis relate to living alone versus living with others, I also want to share that about a quarter of our participants reported that they live alone, and the others have a varying number of cohabitants. And in the future, we'd like to look a little closer into the composition of these cohabitants and the number of them. But again, in the interest of both presenting time and the time we had to analyze these data, I'm just going to be talking about people living alone versus people living with others. And people living with others now includes all of these other numbers of cohabitants. So To begin with, we asked our participants to report the amount of touches they had had in the previous week from the moment that they filled in the survey. And we offered, instead of assuming that they'd be able to make an actual numerical judgment, we offered a ordinal scale ranging from not at all to more than 10 times a day. And we asked this question of 4 potential categories of other: a stranger, a professional, which in this case means someone who in their professional capacity may have touched you, like a healthcare provider or a hairdresser. Then we asked about someone close who you don't live with, and about a cohabitant. And we see that majority of our participants have not received at least a lot of touches from strangers in the past week. Most of them not at all. A little more for someone close, but still it's individual cases of touching rather than a very widespread social touching, which is very much in line with what has been the recommendation during this time. On the contrary, people report having received quite a bit of touch from people they live with, which is maybe not surprising. If you live with someone, you may have had this experience as well. Probably depends on who the person you're living with is, but we haven't had a chance to properly analyze that yet. We also asked people to give a retrospective recall estimation of how much touch they would have received in a typical week prior to the pandemic. And we see, if we compare these two, if I've done technology right, you should be seeing a comparison very soon. Yes. So here on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see whether we're showing touches that they've actually had or touches that they think they would have gotten on a typical week prior to the pandemic. And we see that during the pandemic, our touch landscapes have narrowed quite a bit, meaning that the touches received from cohabitant actually aren't significantly different between during the pandemic and prior to the pandemic. But from all of these categories of individuals who you don't live with, right now, the amount of touch an average responder then is receiving is much, much, much less than what they would have received prior to the pandemic. Then, partially inspired by the longing for social touch questionnaire, we also asked people, well, how much touch would you have wanted to receive in this previous week? Oh, before we get there, I just want to point out that we did not see any statistically significant differences between respondents living alone and respondents living with others on both how much touch they had actually had from someone close to them who they don't live with, from a professional and a stranger, or in their reports of how much touch they would have received typically prior to the pandemic from someone close to them, a professional and a stranger. So the only difference here is the cohabitant, which people living alone receive 0 touch from a cohabitant, whereas people living with others receive the vast majority of their touches from there. Okay, so this is how much touch people would have wanted to receive in the past week. Again, quite a bit more than what they actually received. Here we should have another GIF showing, yes, so this is how much touch they would have wanted, and this is how much touch they actually received. So there is a pretty clear difference. We're still trying to figure out how exactly to put a number on this because it's an ordinal scale and not a numerosity judgment, but we'll get there eventually. We can tell with non-parametric tests that this difference is very, very significant, apart from cohabitant. Again, touches that people received from a cohabitant and what they would have wanted to receive from cohabitant, not statistical difference, no statistical difference there. And if we compare the amount of touch people would have wanted to the amount of touch people typically received prior to the pandemic, tentatively, it looks like there is no statistically significant difference between the touch you would have typically received and touch you wanted in the past week. for cohabitant and a professional. So there are people, for cohabitant, there wasn't a difference at all, also to the hand touch. And for professional, people are just longing to go back to how it was, maybe to be able to get their haircuts or their manicures or physiotherapies or whatever. Contrarily, there is a slight difference between how much touch people report they would have wanted to receive and how much they would have received typically prior to the pandemic, related to someone close to them who they don't live with, and to a stranger. And this now, I mean, we don't know exactly why that is, but there are several plausible explanations. One of which is that maybe people were already receiving more touch than they would have wanted prior to the pandemic. But based on Ria Bessler's paper, which was the one establishing the longing for interprofessional touch questionnaire, maybe not that likely. And the other explanation that I think is fairly plausible is that maybe the ways in which we socially interact and how we see touch has at least temporarily shifted a little due to COVID. But again, we don't really have data showing what explanation is the correct one. I can just speculate here, which I will gladly do. And finally, if we think about wanting touch, we do see a difference between people living alone versus living with others. So up until now, these two groups have responded exactly the same for the three groups of non-cohabitants that we asked about. But if we look at wanting touch, participants who live alone report wanting significantly more touch from a close non-cohabitant than participants living with others. So it's this bar. So here on we have pairs of bars, and the left-hand side shows the people living alone, and the right-hand side shows people living with others. And the difference was not significant for professional touch and stranger touch, but for someone close, it was actually quite a robust effect. And again, many possible explanations. I feel like maybe the most plausible one is that people living with others, for them not being able to touch people they don't live with, is basically getting rid of their second most frequent source of social touch. Whereas for people living with others, people you are close to but don't live with is likely to be the most important source of social touch. So essentially, people living alone have been robbed of more than people living with others. Again, pure speculation, but I feel like that is very plausible in this scenario. Okay. So that was these judgments, but we have another question type that I wanted to share with you. So we showed our participants videos of touch communication. We used, let's not go there just yet. We used short video clips showing stereotypical patterns of communicating a particular sentiment via touch. And this is now based on a really fantastic paper by Sarah McIntyre, who is a co-author on this project that she just had accepted in Psych Science, where they established that for a number of distinct communication messages, looking at a typical way of communicating this sentiment via touch, if they standardize that, it gets really well recognized, at least in a forced choice task. So we showed 6 different videos, conveniently corresponding to 6 different messages that they used in the Psych Science study. And these videos were meant to show touches that were very typical of patterns of touches people use to signal attention getting, calming, gratitude, happiness, love, and sadness. And we asked the participants if they would like to be touched like this by 11 different touchers. We asked about a partner, a family member, a friend, a child, an acquaintance, and a stranger. And for each of these, except for the stranger, we asked, think of a friend who lives with you, or think of a friend who doesn't live with you. and then told them that if they, for example, are not living with a friend, imagine a friend to be living with you. For stranger, we assumed that you would probably not be living with strangers, so that was only shown as not living with you option. So here we see an example of a video. I'm going to show you all of them if we have time. So you can play the guessing game and try to figure out which message each of these videos may be conveying as I talk through them. But the question we asked the participants was, at the moment, how much would you like it if any of these people who live with you or who don't live with you, they were given two sets of people, touch you in this way? And the answers were would like, I don't mind, or I would not like, which we then converted to I would like 1, don't mind 0, and would not like -1, so that we can present to you kind of the average response or the average amount of liking participants responding. And here, so the dark line in the middle shows where the 0 goes, which is about neutral, and then below is would not like, above it would like. And there's 2 series of data. The one on the left that is a little bit darker and a solid line is about a cohabitant. So for example, a child who lives with you. And the one that's on the right is and a little lighter and with a dashed line is about a non-cohabitant. So a child you don't live with. This, I'm guessing maybe many of you have guessed, this was the attention getting touches. Let's go forward. There's another video. One of the things that you will notice in pretty much all of the responses was that the relationship matters. So there is a fairly clear difference between the different types of imagined toucher, in terms of which relationship the participant has with them. This was a stereotypical happiness conveying touch. Move on to the next video. The relationship mattering shouldn't maybe be surprising to you if you've ever heard me talk about touch, because that's kind of one of my key messages is it really, for our perception of touch, whether we would like it or not, whether it's okay or not, it's really important who the other person is. So here we have a fantastic CT optimal-ish touch, as explained nicely by Rochelle at the beginning of the day. And this is the typical love conveying touch. Here we have another fairly CT-esque touch type. And yes, this one is meant to be the calming touch. Then we go on to the second last video. You may have noticed that there seems to be a steady but small effect of the cohabitation status, where people reliably, but not by a lot, rate the touches coming from someone they imagine living with or actually live with as a little more okay, or a little more liking to those than people they don't live with. This is gratitude. And then finally, I saved the best for last. We have one touch where the response pattern is a little bit different in that there is instead of a tiny effect of cohabitation, there's really a quite big effect of social cohabitation, where people report much more that they would like to be touched by a cohabitant in different social network member categories like this than the same person as a non-cohabitant. I should add that the participants weren't flagged that what these videos were about. They were just asked, how much would you like it if any of these people touch you in this way? So they were not told, oh, this video depicts such and such. They were just shown a series of videos. This video is a stereotypical sadness indicator. And we're not sure if it's the fact that it is interpreted as such, or if there's something in the touch itself that makes this very pronounced differential between cohabitants and non-cohabitants. So if we look at all of these data's series in the same plot, you see that there is, as I said, the sadness differential between cohabitants and non-cohabitants much larger there, but it is actually present in ordinal regression. It is actually present for all of the videos. It's just way more pronounced there. Also, there was, of course, a significant main effect of the relationship type. If you have any thoughts on why the sadness is a little weird or very different than the others, I would very much love to hear them in the comments below, or just, chatting at some point. We also had a hypothesis that these ratings would differ by whether the person is living alone or not. But it turns out that that is not the case, at least not the way we're currently analyzing this, which is with ordinal regression. So there is no significant main effect of respondents living alone or not. So here the reddish markers are people living alone, and the bluish markers are people living with others. We also don't see an interaction between living alone and whether the person you're answering about is a cohabitant or not. So a brief summary. Ooh, it came all at once. Yes, a brief summary. Frequency of touch from no cohabitants. We get similar reports from people living with others and people living alone, both for pandemic times and how they recall time before the pandemic. But people living alone reported wanting more frequent touch from a non-cohabiting close other than people living with others. And people would reliably like the same touch more from a cohabitant than someone of the same relationship type that they don't live with. And this effect is particularly clear in the touch video communicating sadness. A little bit more about the last, still about this cohabiting other, non-cohabiting other. We don't have the same exact kind of data from a large sample prior to the pandemic, unfortunately. So we don't know if this proximity effect of having a slightly more people liking it if it's a cohabitant, if that's a pandemic thing, meaning people would maybe feel more comfortable if it came from a cohabitant and therefore they respond like this, or if it's a persistent effect that we might see also normally. And finally, huge thanks to everybody who's been working on this with me, especially Sarah McIntyre, who's contributed to a lot of or most of the analysis you saw today, but also my other colleagues at LiU, India Morrison and Giovanni Novembre. And then we've been very lucky to get to work with Uta Saylor from Uni of Oslo on this project. I think I will stop my sharing there, if able to. Yes.
Thank you so much, Julia, for a great talk. Those are not such preliminary findings, and that there's a ton in there to talk about. And I'm sure there is going to be a lot of activity, not only hopefully today and in the days that follow, but also once these papers come out. Hopefully before that, we can also have a good chat, because I think there's a lot of overlap, not only between your study and obviously Ilona's, which I think you talked about in terms of touch frequency, but also some of the things that we've been doing in collaboration with Francis. There are a couple things coming through. So we've got, as I'm going to be quiet and hold myself back, but I will be sending you crazy emails. Probably
looking forward to that.
So we have Connor Haggerty saying, I think comfort is an appropriate title for this kind of touch, which would make sense during the pandemic. So that's just a comment rather than a question. And then again, another comment from Jean Barlow, who I say hello to, who says not only thank you and how interesting your talk was, but referred to, I think you asked for some feedback with regards to your sadness findings. And I'll come to you with something on that myself. But she says that sadness is a very personal experience, and naturally people do not like to show sadness because there is a fear that it implies weakness. So it might be more about the display of those emotions rather than how they feel, which I think is incredibly insightful. Thank you, Jean. I hadn't even thought about that. I would be curious how you phrased it in the questionnaire. I think that might be useful.
Yeah, just a second. The exact wording that people saw was they saw the video and they just saw, at the moment, how much would you like if any of these people who live with you or who don't live with you in two separate sections touch you in this way. So there was nothing about that this video was meant to convey something, or, this is a sadness video. How much would you like it? Like, none of that. It was just how much would you like and a video. So there, I think the question is this so intuitively understood as sadness that already repels people a little bit? Or is it something about the type of touch that's being used that is a little kind of, splits people more to cohabitants and non-cohabitants? I forgot to mention, this was the question that we probably got the most don't know, not applicable. Hey, we got a extra spectator. So we got a lot of also don't knows to this question for this specific sadness video. So this was clearly, there was something in this video that threw people a little bit off, and it would be really interesting to know what that was. I think your little spectator might want to rejoin.
He definitely wants to rejoin, but he's going to have to wait because there are more things coming through. So Vilivi says fascinating data, and had a thought that had popped up into my head as well, which is that the sadness effect again. So everybody, see, you ask and people respond.
Thank you.
This type of touch might be more intrusive. It is the only touche where the toucher actually grabbed the receiver, which might impact the feeling of escapability.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I think that might be. I was also thinking that it might be, if you're communicating sadness to someone. I don't know how often you do. Like, we definitely comfort people through touch, but I don't know how many times we reach out and go, "I'm really sad." It's I think there might be something in that. And then Ali Sarah Green, I apologize if I'm butchering your names. She says, yes, Jean, and also sad people are more vulnerable and so more sensitive. And then there's a last question very quickly from Paulo Silva, who said, I would like to ask if you asked what emotions the participant thought it was being displayed, because personally the sadness did seem a bit aggressive.
What a great question. We did not in this study, but there is another study running with similar touch emoticons, slightly updated videos, but almost the same stuff, where we asked people both, or rather Sarah and Rebecca Böhm, asked people both either forced choice, like, what do you think this communicates? And also half of the participants answer open-endedly, what do you think this video was trying to communicate? So hopefully there will be more information coming about that in the not too distant future, but in people in that this was a communication attempt, which is asked, would you like this kind of touch?
Perfect. Thank you for wrapping up the question and answer part of our time with you. I'm going to welcome back Rochelle. I'm going to thank you, Julia, for your incredible talk. I always love listening to you. You should just talk all the time. Well, you need to collect more data and talk all the time. So you have to find a way to do that in parallel. We do have our next speaker in the wing. So yes, once again, many thanks to Julia and for presenting that data. Also to Sarah McIntyre, who helped obviously enormously with that data. And